Welcome. We're so glad you
Thanks,
could be
Mike.
here. Yeah.
So glad to
Um,
be here.
would you, your reputation speaks for itself, but would you, for those that don't know you, would you be willing to just briefly introduce yourself?
Absolutely, Mike. No, thank you for having me. Everyone, nice to meet you. Mohit Saini, originally from India. Right now, I'm dialing in from Amsterdam, which is where our head office for Phoenix Capital Group Impact is located. And I'm part of the Impact Advisory team at Phoenix Capital. And Phoenix, some of you might know it, but we have been historically known for organizing impact investing events, which is now a separate business. But on the impact advisory side, we work with the large institutional investors to select fund based on their impact mandate. We then work with the fund managers to provide IMM advisory services, which also includes a lot of work around the impact verification, and which is spread across the impact practices as well as impact performance reporting norms. And that's brief about me, Mike.
Perfect. Thanks for that, and thanks for being willing to join us. So, could you tell us a little bit about your experience with impact verification, just in general, and in particular, like how and why could it add value? Why would somebody do this?
Yeah. So one of the things which we do at Phoenix, Mike, is we have what we believe, and I believe as well, but one of the world's largest impact fund database, wherein as of now, as I speak, we have more than 3,000 impact funds, which have been tracked and monitored by our team. What we have seen is in the last 5 years, it has grown by 50%. And we are just talking about the ones which has been approved by us, and hence we are qualifying them as impact investing fund. Imagine the number of funds which are there in the market, self-proclaimed fund managers saying we have an impact fund. Now, one of the key elements of impact investing is intentionality. And while we see that the impact investing is continuing to become more mainstream, the instances of impact washing, ESG washing, SDG washing, they are all becoming a bit more prominent. What independent verification does, it helps the report preparers, the managers, to go beyond just the good intentions and walk an extra mile to say to the report users, to serious impact investors. They may be impact oriented or very impact focused investors, depending on, as you were hinting earlier, where they are in their impact journey, and say this impact report has actually been verified by a third party expert. And this is where we stand in terms of the alignment with the market practices, the market standards, that is the impact performance reporting norms. Now, at Phoenix, we also do a lot of impact fund selection work, wherein we are working in collaboration on behalf of a Dutch pension fund, for example. And we can talk more about where the differences are in terms of where Dutch pension funds think versus the US one, as we're hinting. But over here, I've seen that there's quite some interest in terms of saying, look at the impact at a bit more serious level, for example. So when we are auditing a fund, doing a due diligence on a fund manager and a fund, we see, as you were saying, additional level of confidence in the data and the report, which is being or verified by the third party. And of course, we understand when it comes to reporting norms and the report verification of that, it's pretty early, but in general, the consensus around third party verification, the confidence which is attached to is pretty strong here. So it helps, we hope that it helps the investors as well to improve the usage of impact report in the impact investment decision making. For fund managers, it's a good way to say that we have a complete and a reliable impact report. And I think in summary, I would say that impact review helps the manager to say we are moving beyond just ambitions and intention, and we're moving towards accountability and credibility.
Perfect. Thanks for that. And for those that are familiar with the recent developments in the marketplace around, impact verifications against things like the operating principles for impact management, I'm delighted that we actually have Juhi here on the call, who leads the secretariat of the operating principles, the impact principles. And welcome her to jump in too. Mohit, how would you distinguish between how do you approach verification against the operating principles of impact management versus like impact reporting, performance reporting norms?
Since you mentioned Juice on the call, I have to watch my words, how I describe OPIM, or not even use that impact principle verification. But I think it's just, if we look at a macro level, when we look at impact accountability, there are two pillars which we look at. One is the practice, one is the performance. The impact principle has been doing a pretty impressive job in terms of providing guidance of how impact can be considered when anybody is any fund manager is setting up, or even investors are setting up their impact management and a bit of ESG practices as well, from pre-investment to post-investment, and looking at impact at exit as well. When over there, the guidance is more on the practice side. The reporting norm is going a bit differently and talking more about the impact performance reporting norms. Of course, there is a bit of overlap as well. Even when we look at some sections in the reporting norm, section 1 and 2 has some overlap with that, a bit of in other sections as well. Now, when in terms of the differences, of course, for anybody to go for a third-party verification for the impact principles, they need to be a signatory, which comes with a annual and a fixed cost, as well as a recurring cost every year. And it is mandated that they need to go for a verification every few years, and it can vary between 1 to 5 years, but 2 to 3 is the reasonable amount when the clients go for verification. So it's a bit mandatory on that side. On the reporting norm side, it's voluntary. It's good to have practice for different reasons. One of the key differences, I would say, is unit of analysis. So when we are doing the impact practice verification, we are mostly looking at the IMM-ready documents, the internal processes they have, the Excel sheet, for example, used to capture data from the portfolio companies, and how is impact-related discussions are in the agenda when they are doing a quarterly check-in with the portfolio companies, as well as how does that feed into the feedback loop when they are looking at an annual review of the practices, what is the scope for improvement stuff. When it comes to reporting, and that's where I think discussion with you and Matt has helped us a lot, we are looking at impact reports, or even broadly impact reporting documents. Now, we understand that it's a bit earlier as well, wherein everything is not included in the impact reports, and hence we are as well a bit flexible in defining impact reporting documents. Those can be, ideally they should be investor facing, but as of now, we are open to having those as voluntary or on demand shared with the investors. So that's the key thing around the unit of analysis.
That's an important point, which is that although the norms talk about the impact report as if there is only one document, you actually are willing to broaden the scope to look at all forms of disclosure that may occur. Juhi, would love to welcome you in if you'd like to jump in.
I'm happy to. And Mohit, I would first say that you did a very fine job explaining, and also appreciate the accuracy with which you talked about the frequency and whatnot. So nothing to add there, but I would just mention that it is mandatory for signatories to OPIM, but then I am also seeing that even non-signatories are starting to do some verifications as well, and a few providers also offering that. In addition to a verification for practice and now voluntary for reporting, I'm also seeing verifications and assurances for data that's provided. So it's really getting to the measurement metrics piece, and some asset owners asking for that. It does bring up questions around the cost of various verifications. So one of the things that we hear from signatories and non-signatories for the industry is kind of how do we manage the costs of verifications when it's not clear who's paying for it. And I think there's some pioneering asset owners who are offering to pay for it, but then how do co-investors share it, and how do managers deal with sometimes having to bear the burden of the cost for the field? So what we would like to see is kind of this being a little bit more common practice in the field, and that the cost being both affordable, accessible for different types of providers with access to more qualified verifiers, but also as a field figuring out how to pay for it in a way that's reasonable for different stakeholders.
It's a great contribution. Thank you, Juhi. We're so glad you're here. Thought I might welcome any other comments from folks who wanted to jump in, but if not, then I guess I might follow up with a question to you, Mohit. So what does this look like in practice? Like, who does this, and what do they do when they do a verification of an impact report?
I think I would hope that it's a pretty standard process for other verifiers as well. But for us, it practically looks like there are 3 team members, 2 analysts, 1 project lead, and we are looking at 5 steps process and 3 touch points essentially. And when we kick off the project, we shared a data request form to the clients, which is in line with what we expect to do the verification. Then the two analysts separately, using the rubric, which I can speak about a bit, does the independent analysis across those criteria. Then they come together in the presence of project lead. Then we see the variance where it exists in terms of scoring those specific criteria. Then we go back to the client with the preliminary analysis, present it, give them an opportunity to provide additional documents. And if we have misunderstood or we have to consider other documents as an evidence, we give that opportunity to the client. Then we go back, we do the second round of analysis. And the fifth stage is the client presentation, wherein we go back, present the findings, the ratings, as well as best practices and peer benchmarking and verify statements. So that's what we end up doing. The unit of analysis, as I was saying, we include as of now broadly the impact reporting documents, which can be both voluntary as well as on demand, shared with the investors. In terms of rubric, which is again thanks to you and Matt for giving your inputs for us to shape up the rubric which we have created. We have as of now 56 criteria, of which 1/3 are what we consider high importance and the must-have criteria. And as also in line with the supplementary guidance you have, where the should and the must be considered as strongly recommended. So we have used the same approach to make sure that at least some of the criteria are there when we are giving some ratings to the clients. And in terms of the overall weightage, the first 3 sections of the 5 sections we have get 3/4 of the weightage. The remaining 2 sections are 25% weighted. And when it comes to output, what does the client get? They, of course, get a presentation wherein we have insights and ratings for 5 sections, as well as the overall rating as to where do they stand in terms of the degree of alignment with the reporting norms. We also share a best practices deck, so as to not just tell them where they stand, but also to show them where the other peers are and how can they go closer to that if they implement the recommendation. And in addition to that, we have a verifier statement, which is typical like the way we see in the impact principles verification, which summarizes the ratings and the findings which we have.
Terrific. Thank you, Morten. It's actually really interesting to hear. I mean, it reminds me of when we were working on version 1 and trying to debate to what extent would it be possible for all of the verifiers to be all working off exactly the same set of questions, so that market participants will feel like no matter who they go to, they'll have some degree of comparability and confidence in how it was gone about, and trying to strike that balance between, and that obviously is not that degree of standardization, I think, doesn't make sense, but trying to bring a bit more consistency and standardization both to the contents and format of impact reports, but also to what are the verifiers and assurance providers looking for, so that there's more market confidence in the growing number of verification and assurance providers. And it was really neat to see your development of your rubric, which was anchored in the norms, but also put the sort of special PCG impact lens on top of it. So then with that, I mean, just the last question would be, how do you see the findings of verifications being used? Like, what decisions do they inform, or what improvements do they lead to?
Yeah, I think first is that we are providing an outside-in perspective to the fund managers, the report preparers, which helps them to look at the specific sections, subsections, where they can improve, as well as then improve the degree of alignment going forward with the reporting norms. What we have found very, very useful, and the case in point, Genui, a private equity firm based in Germany, actually, we have done the last verification with them. They really found the targeted recommendations with an action plan, which was actually broken down into a 2x2 matrix, wherein we, in addition to just talking about the degree of alignment, we also mentioned how they can implement the recommendations closer and go close to the best practices. And then we divided the recommendation in a 2x2 matrix between efforts, which is required to implement, versus the impact it can have to improve the degree of alignment with the reporting norm, which actually they found very useful. We also bucketed those recommendations into 3 categories: create, enhance, and adapt, because we realized that it's not that they have to climb depending on where they stand in terms of the ratings. They don't have to create everything from scratch. Some of the policies, as per the norms, they do not have, but otherwise they can just enhance a few things which they have in line with the reporting norms. So I think that was very helpful. We hope as every verifier and we do more verifications, we will have a more benchmarking data, which we understand from the impact practice verification. The peer benchmarking data is really useful to the clients. So as more and more of that happens, they will get the peer benchmarking, but at the same time, they will be able to see where they stand year one versus compared to the year next time they come. So they will also be able to see the gap in the re-verification. And hopefully one of the wish I personally have is if that all this helps them to figure out how to channel the resources which they have in terms of the human resources, the financial resources, as well as the time to allocate on which sections are more important to them, because we understand that the norms are intentionally ambitious. That's where I personally love the comply versus explain feature. So the client can then take a call, what is the direction they want to take, and then figure out where to put the resources.
Perfect. Thank you, Mohit. And would love to open it up to questions from the group. Those are all the questions that I had prepared, but Mohit, is there anything that you wanted to share that we didn't touch on already?
I think I'm open to the question. Yeah. I just think that the comprehensiveness of the norms is really, I personally really appreciate, and I've been following it for quite a lot of time, and I think it does a really good job of giving quite some guidance to the report preparers. And my only hope is that A, the report preparers use it a lot more, and B, that the investors also find the report aligned with those norms to be a bit more useful in the investment decision making.
Thanks, Mohit. We hope that too. Any questions for Mohit or comments in general, experiences that you all may have had with verification?
My question, Mike. Hi, Mohit. I was curious. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I was curious in your reflections on the results of verifications, and if you could just provide some high-level commentary on what you're seeing in terms of common and emerging practices in impact reporting aligned to the norms. Just to hear your reflections.
Very, very good question. I think, and I will caveat that by saying that we have done like a single figure verification. So it's just a growing trend. I would not say like I can qualify it with certainty. I think one of the key things I would say is that the third section, the impact performance reporting section, and within that, the impact performance section, that's where we see there's a lot of scope for improvement. The initial, I personally think the 1 and 2, it's more about the narrative, the theoretical part. The impact performance section is the key one, but that's how I look at the impact performance reporting norms. And I think that's where quite some clients, fund managers have challenged, because we are expecting them to report on negative impacts, even comparison compared to the benchmark. And if they've set in targets, we also see that not everybody, or rather very few players in the market are setting up those targets. But when it comes to reporting against those, that's a best practice we would hope, but that's something not what we see. The other thing I would say, the norms does a good job of providing guidance on how to go about a case study. I think so far we have seen so many different types of case study, but with this, we hope that there will be at least a bit more comprehensiveness in how we see the case studies being presented, and at the same time, how those are used by the investors.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Mike, you're on mute, I think.
For goodness sake, Ryan, do you want to jump in?
Sure, thanks. Took me a while to learn how to raise my hand, so let's see if I can. Oh, look at that! I lowered it. I use Microsoft Teams. I'm feeling digitally illiterate on how much time it took me to figure that out. Nonetheless, in the interest of time, so thanks for the description, Mohit. It's actually really interesting to see kind of how this is playing out in practice, and like how you're kind of doing some of what we've seen a lot more on like verifying impact practices, and now we're getting to kind of performance results and kind of your early findings, like really interesting. I'm not new to the concept of assurance or audit. Previously worked as a financial statement auditor, and so have a lot of experience there, but new to the concept of like verification services. And so a couple of things that come to my mind, like I'm just trying to understand like how you guys challenge this, also like, well, how this also plays out in the work. So one of the things that I'm curious about is like how you guys maintain like a sense of objectivity or independence when you kind of have someone who's a payer and is asking for that, and really hoping that you give them a good verification rating, but maybe they don't actually deserve a clarification rating. So that's something that shows up in audit a lot, especially around kind of oversight. Are we doing assurance services, but can we also do consulting? And like just like so much regulation is played out there in terms of kind of audit failures or auditor independence. And I guess just also like how you manage that tactfully. Like it must be really hard where you're paying client, they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to get audit. They're a leader. That's a voluntary, and maybe you don't have a lot of instances but anyways, just kind of how do you manage that tension in your world?
Thanks for the excellent question, Ryan. I think one of the things which we would expect or I would assume is that as a rule of thumb, those who are coming for verification, they probably believe that they are much ahead in that curve, and hence they are better, and hence it is a good rating, of course. And I think as a verifier, if you ask me, one of the most important skill, I think, is that pushback skill, that knowing that you gave the rating with full integrity based on the rubric. And I think that's where the guidance which is in the rubric really helps. And that's where we also have this independent analyst doing the analysis. And if there is a disconnect, then we speak about it even before we go to the client. So of course, there has been instances where the client who believe that they are really good on some elements and they don't really get good rating, there's a pushback. But to maintain the integrity of the service which we offer, we give them the rationale to the best of their ability. We give them a chance to provide additional evidence, what we are looking for. That's what we do. That's how we try to negotiate. And I think that's where the preliminary call helps. Very rarely does it happen, and that's not a good practice after the final presentation, because sometimes they're like, oh, we have additional document, which actually we could share. And in reality, or at least not on the reporting norm, but on the impact principle side, we also see sometimes, depending on how much time you give to the client, there are instances where they can create something on the go. Then do you consider that? How do you make a judgment call on that? So that's where, when we do verification, we are pretty strict about this 4 to 6 weeks timeline. Everything which has to happen in terms of documentation should happen within this time period. And regarding that conflict of interest, no, of course, there are some verification firm like us. We also do advisory. So there is a conflict of interest section wherein we categorically say we were not involved in creating any report or on the impact principle side in developing the IMM systems or processes they have. So we try to be have full integrity in what we do. We really trust the rubric and the guidance which we have. And the side effect of that is that the client may not come for re-verification, but I think if that's the price personally for me of doing the job with integrity, that's okay. I'm speaking for myself.
Thanks. Yeah, no, thanks so much for that response. Very insightful, and really appreciate how you're managing it. I can tell you've thought a lot about this and really leaned in and thought about how you balance that. So thanks so much.
Of course, man. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
And I might just jump in and note that it's a great example of how the reporter norms can be used in combination with assurance standards, which provide guidance on how to go through an assurance process, as well as the codes of ethics. And so in the Metro Performance report, we actually signposted to some of the ethical standards that accountants and auditors are held to. Not necessarily assuming that they transfer one-to-one to the impact context, but that there are analogies that are useful. Juhi.
Thanks, Mike. Had one comment and a question. Ryan, I really appreciate the question, and Mohit and the answers, because we've been doing looking at a lot of verifications on the impact principles side on the practice, and there's different types of verifiers, right? Those that are coming from impact advisory backgrounds and have in-depth knowledge of the practices and what needs to be in reporting, and then those who are coming from audit backgrounds. And we find that there's often a more in-depth, so the verification versus assurance that Mike shared, limited assurance, I might say, there's kind of a lot more in-depth, almost like a recommendation that comes out of ones that are done by the advisory background verifiers. So we do appreciate those in terms of advancing the IMM practices. But then there is a possible conflict of interest for sure, as they have also advised a lot of clients. So I think that is such a critical piece of maintaining integrity of the verification practices in general. So really appreciate highlighting that piece. A question for Mohit, because you are doing both verification of practices as well as verification of reports now, and also coming from advisors. what's in the norm, which is nice, is that, there's a practice section where you are describing the practices. If you are signatory, you can just use the disclosure statement. And our belief is that you can't really do quality reporting unless you have quality management in place, right? Like, to what extent are you seeing that in your verification work? Like, are you seeing kind of consistent patterns emerging in that work? And what's the kind of behavior or action from doing the verification of reporting? Are clients now going back and trying to improve management practices? Is it a cycle in that way, or is it kind of more is done practice, but just not showing up in reporting? So I'm just curious to see the relationship.
Yeah, excellent question, Joey. And I think I agree with the line of thinking that you need to have a good practices for you to have good reporting in most cases. And one of the key service before we actually created this impact performance reporting verification is what we have impact fund assessment, IFA, which is what we have been using for almost 5 years to select funds and to do the fund assessment across intentionality, reporting, ESG consideration, governance, and everything, and has been using that framework to select funds for the investors when we are working on the impact mandate. And before the reporting norms came up, as well as if there are fund managers early in their journey, if it's like a first-time fund, emerging fund, and they haven't gone through even 1 year cycle to actually create an impact report, there is a lot of consideration given to what processes and systems they have, the IMM broadly, what they have. So what we have seen, of course, that takes the major weightage in terms of assessing that fund. That if they have good processes, then we can say, okay, how close do you think you want to be in terms of the good reporting? What standards do you have? What metrics are you going to use? But if they don't have processes, then it's very difficult to believe that they'll do a good job on the reporting norms, because the understanding, the adaptability of the norms which are existing in the market is missing. So we have a tough time to give high rating to those. And we definitely, I think in the overall fund assessment, we do give a bit more rating to the principles rather, which are provided under those 9 principles. The intentionality, the management of impact at exit. So those criteria are a bit more prominent there. Now we are seeing that the fund managers who have good impact practices, now they want to take this path of good impact reporting, because that's of course, a new norms which has come up in the market, and the serious ones, they are always trying to see how they can push the bar much higher. So practices is covered. Now let's go and do a good job on the reporting side. So that's what we have been seeing here. I would only say that when it comes to the pension funds or the investors, the thinking as of now among those is that let's look at the impact thesis, and some of the impact thesis is a bit more, which is more important. And at least in the Dutch world, they are a bit particular about the impact metrics as well. So these are the 2 top things which are even spoken very openly by the investors who are trying to do serious impact investing. But it's good to see that they are at least talking about both the things.
I can jump in with the question. Ella Schuster with KKR Global Impact. Mohit, can you speak to how frequently folks are getting their reports independently reviewed in terms of like plans going forward, and also in terms of timeline? When are they being reviewed? Is it after publication, and then when you give those recommendations, they have a few months to implement?
Yeah, I think so. Of course, the norms came out last year. It's just been 18 months. So we have built the service. We have started to offer. So we haven't done any re-verification as of now, but from the impact principles recommendation as well as experience of verifying, I can say that hopefully clients will come back for re-verification at least every 2 to 3 years, which is, I think, is a good timeline as well for them to follow. And in terms of, sorry, your second question was around what, Ella? Can you repeat that?
Yep, just in the publication timeline, when the reports are reviewed, like, is it usually post-publication?
Yeah, so we have seen both. I think ideally, of course, the recent client which we worked with came pre-publication. And that's where I think to Mike's last question, what happens with the findings? Then they go back and they implement it. Of course, then it's a good value add, which we believe we can do. So I would say that the ones who are creating impact report for the first time, they would ideally like to come before they have published the report, so that they are able to go as close to the reporting norms as possible. The ones who have been doing it for quite some time are the ones who we see are coming after they're published. But it also is a function, of course, of the reasons with which they are coming. Is it because if they are raising, let's say, some new fund, then the timeline is not essentially about the report. It's about when they are planning to go to the market for the next one, and what value add will that do when they are engaging with the investors. So I would say it's spread across. For early fund managers is pre-production of report, for advanced one mostly afterwards, and when they are going, we have the experience of creating reports a bit more.
Got it. That's super helpful context. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that great Q&A.